They told you the serpent was dangerous, that its coils were chaos, that to follow its path would lead you into madness, into delusion, into hell. But they never told you the truth, that the serpent was memory, that it wasn't sent to harm you but to wake you. And what looks like chaos is only the unraveling of a lie so deeply woven into your being that you called it you. You weren't meant to fear the serpent. You were meant to become it. Because before it was demonized, before it was twisted into a symbol of temptation, the serpent was sacred. It guarded temples, coiled around staffs, crowned the gods. Its spiral shape marked the spine of awakened ones. Its movement mirrored the pattern of galaxies, of DNA, of every breath of creation rising from stillness. In every tradition that remembered, the serpent was the current of divine intelligence, dormant, coiled at the base of the body, waiting for the right moment to rise. But the moment isn't safe. It never was. Because Kundalini doesn't come to make you comfortable. It comes to burn what you've mistaken for comfort. Your stories, your labels, your identity, your patterns. It's not here to decorate your spirituality. It's here to dismantle your false self with surgical precision. This is why the serpent was cast as the villain, because nothing threatens the ego's illusion of control more than a force that refuses to be tamed. You were told that Kundalini was an experience, a rush of heat, a jolt of bliss, a tremble in the body. You were told it happens during yoga, during breath work, during some mystical weekend workshop where incense fills the air and silence is sold in hour-long increments. But this is not the serpent. This is its shadow. The real Kundalini does not ask for your consent. It does not wait for your readiness. It moves when the soul is ripe for annihilation. And when it does, your life does not get better. It gets true. And truth is rarely what you hoped for. You will not feel special. You will feel split, as if something is peeling you from yourself, scraping centuries of falsehood from your nervous system. Your dreams will shift. Your emotions will surge. Your body will rebel. And you will ask, what's wrong with you? Not knowing that nothing is wrong. Everything is being rewritten. Because this serpent doesn't climb a staircase of peace. It ascends a ladder made of bones, bones of who you thought you were. One vertebra at a time, one layer of illusion per breath. And with each pulse of its fire, it asks, are you willing to shed the skin you prayed to keep? The ancient mystics knew this was not a metaphor. They left symbols carved into stone, encoded into chants, veiled in parables, always pointing to a hidden energy coiled at the base of the spine. Dormant, divine, dangerous. They called it Shakti. They called it the solar serpent. They called it the bride of Shiva. But names are nothing. This is not a goddess to worship. This is a force that lives inside your marrow. It is the part of you you've been trying to outrun with logic, with doctrine, with distraction. And when it stirs, the run ends. There is a reason the temples were guarded by serpents. A reason initiates had to pass through layers of silence before approaching the inner sanctum. Not to keep secrets from the world, but to prepare the soul for what cannot be faked. Because when Kundalini rises, there is no mask thick enough to withstand its gaze. It will look through you. It will look as you. And what it sees, it will burn. The serpent was never evil. It was only misnamed by those who feared what it could awaken. And now it coils again. Not in the scriptures, not in the myths, but in you. It didn't arrive when you lit incense. It didn't come after years of seeking or the moment you stumbled into your first meditation. It was there long before the books, before the practices, before the hunger for awakening ever took hold. You were born with it. Not as a concept, not as a theory, but as fire. And not metaphorical fire, not poetic warmth, but the kind of flame that waits beneath your skin, humming like a memory older than breath. You were born with the fire, but you forgot how to feel it. Not because it disappeared, but because the world taught you to numb it. taught you to trade it for approval, for normalcy, for a mask that wouldn't melt under pressure. They handed you names, roles, beliefs, systems, and with every layer, the fire dimmed. Not extinguished, only hidden. The serpent slept, coiled in the first chamber of your being, watching, waiting, and you called it emptiness. But it wasn't empty. It was compressed light. It was life folded into itself, waiting for you to stop trying to be someone and start becoming what you've always been. This is the paradox. Kundalini doesn't descend into you. It emerges from you. You are not chosen for it. You are built for it. The fire was never meant to be chased. It was meant to be remembered. And remembrance is not an idea. It is a reignition. It happens in a moment of silence so thick it silences even thought. In a dream that tears through your chest like a code unlocking itself. In a breakdown so complete it cracks the shell around your soul, letting the flame leak back into your bloodstream. This is the fire that makes the body shake when truth is near. The burn behind your eyes when you almost remember something you can't name. The heat that rises when you speak what you were never supposed to say. It is not mental. It is cellular. It is not spiritual. It is elemental. It is not an add-on to your path. It is the path. And it doesn't need your permission. When it stirs, it does not ask what you believe. It does not care how many years you've studied. It doesn't wait for your schedule to open. It moves like a storm with a sacred agenda to turn your false life into ash. Not because it hates you, but because it loves what lives beneath your masks more than the masks themselves. This is not about awakening as a goal, it's about ignition as a consequence. You touch the truth, and the body becomes a furnace. You stop pretending, and the energy rushes in like breath returning to the soul. Kundalini doesn't arrive to give you visions. It arrives to burn through your blindness. And the first thing it takes is comfort. Because you were not born to be comfortable. You were born to carry flame. And yet most people run the moment it flickers. They call it anxiety, call it a crisis, call it madness, not realizing the system is heating up. The dormant is rising, the fire is knocking, and the body remembers long before the mind can explain it. You were told to fear fire, that it destroys, but no one told you what it reveals. The soul is not illuminated by light, it is revealed by flame. And this flame does not cast shadows, it consumes them. The first sign is not light, it's fracture. Something begins to split, not with violence, but with inevitability. You start to feel the edges of your life no longer holding. The dreams that once comforted you start to suffocate. The mask begins to itch. The patterns unravel. And you tell yourself you're falling apart, not knowing that something deeper is finally coming through. Kundalini does not begin with bliss, it begins with breakdown. And that's where most people turn away, because the mythology you were fed was incomplete. It told you that awakening would feel good, that the path would be lined with peace, grace, clarity. But it didn't mention the demolition crew. It didn't mention the screaming of the psyche as the old structure collapses. It didn't tell you that the divine doesn't decorate, it dismantles. You are not breaking, you are birthing. But birth is not gentle, it is raw, it is bloody, it is beyond language. And it doesn't ask for your spiritual vocabulary, it asks for your surrender. Because when Kundalini moves, she doesn't knock. She doesn't ask, she enters. She reconfigures, and she will not leave you as she found you. You may think you're going crazy, but you are only going inward. Your sleep fractures, your digestion shifts, your emotions surge without context. You remember things you never lived. You feel things that were buried beneath lifetimes of silence. The body becomes scripture, and every cell begins to speak in a tongue your mind hasn't yet learned to translate. The old self starts to disintegrate, and in its place, space. Not for comfort, but for truth. This is why mystics went mad. why prophets wept, why the ancients built temples not to worship gods, but to hold what was too large to contain alone. They knew awakening was not a vacation. It was a firestorm, a sacred undoing, a cosmic surgery of the soul. You are not dying. You are unlayering. And every piece that falls away is a lie you thought you needed. A persona, a defense, a survival mechanism that outlived its usefulness. And beneath the rubble, the original signal, the uncorrupted pulse, the serpent not as symbol, but as sequence, your spine realigning, your energy reorienting, your life collapsing not in cruelty, but in coherence. It doesn't feel good, it feels real. Because Kundalini doesn't speak in affirmation, she speaks in earthquakes, she shatters the comfortable prison and hands you the key with no instructions. She asks, can you live without your illusions? Can you walk without your armor? Can you hold the sacred without needing to understand it? You won't get answers at first. You'll get echoes, a feeling, a heat behind the eyes, a grief that doesn't belong to this lifetime, a clarity that hurts more than confusion, and it will all feel too much, because it is, until it isn't, because what you think is the end is only the opening. What you call confusion is the mind losing its grip on control. What feels like fragmentation is the soul reclaiming its space. This isn't breaking, it's blooming in reverse. Before the chants, before the mantras, before the temples rose from stone and symbol, there was one sanctuary already built. Your body. Not an accident. Not a vessel to escape. Not a thing to transcend. It was the map, the altar, the archive. The body was the first temple, and every sacred site that came after was an echo carved in stone of what already lived in your flesh. And Kundalini? She is the flame that waits on its altar. You were taught to bypass the body, to see it as lower, lesser, flawed. But no real awakening begins without it. Because Kundalini doesn't descend from heaven, it rises from bone, from root, from marrow. Her path is through the blood, not around it, through the nervous system, not despite it. And she only ascends if the temple is willing to open its doors. Your spine is not just a structure, it is a scroll. Each vertebra a syllable in a sentence written before your birth. Each curve a chant only the body can sing. This is why the yogis bowed, why the breath was sacred, why posture wasn't performance, but prayer. Because they remembered what modern seekers forget, the body is the script, and the serpent follows syntax. Every chakra is not just a concept, it is a chamber. A gate that opens only when the energy is clean, when the lie has been released, when the wound has been acknowledged. These are not lights to be switched on with force. They are doors that respond to honesty. The more you fake it, the more they lock. The more you listen, the more they tremble open. The temple doesn't open for spectacle, it opens for truth. And truth begins with sensation. Not the mystical kind, but the one you've been running from. The ache in your gut, the tremble in your voice, the grief held in your hips, the rage buried in your throat, the numbness at the crown where connection should have been. These are not distractions from the path. They are the path. Kundalini rises only through what you're willing to feel. That's why she waits. Why the fire stays coiled until the temple stops pretending it's already awake. Because she cannot rise through armor. She rises through openness, through reverence, through the kind of honesty that makes the body weep in gratitude for finally being heard. The mystics didn't silence the body. They amplified it. In Egypt, they mapped the spine as the Jed pillar, the stable axis. In Tantra, the body was Shakti's domain, sacred, wild, untamed. In Taoist alchemy, they spoke of the microcosmic orbit, energy cycling through the body's core like stars around a hidden sun. They weren't guessing. They were listening, and the body was always speaking. But modern spirituality turned that language into noise. It taught you to chase light, ignore pain, seek ascension, abandon Earth, and in doing so, it desecrated the first temple, painted over the sacred with plastic mantras and bypass rituals. And still, Kundalini waits, not for your next technique, but for your return. The body does not want perfection. It wants presence. It wants to be touched by attention without agenda, to be breathed into without rush, to be honored not for how it looks, but for what it holds, because inside your cells are memories that stretch back to stars. And when the fire rises, it activates more than sensation. It awakens the ancestral blueprint of the divine human. You don't need to find the temple. You are standing in it. But can you kneel? You keep waiting for the feeling, the tingles, the warmth, the sense of peace rising in waves across your chest. But Kundalini isn't a feeling. It is a force, and the moment you confuse the two, you turn the sacred into sensation, the divine into drama, the portal into performance. The serpent does not arrive with emotion. She arrives with momentum, and once she moves, your life is no longer your own. Because this force does not respond to want, it responds to truth. It cannot be tricked by mimicry, cannot be coaxed by technique. It waits until the soul cracks open, not because you asked for it, but because your being could no longer contain the lie. And then it moves, not with fireworks but with command, with a precision so exact it terrifies the parts of you that thought they were in control. This is not a mood. This is not energy work. This is primordial current. And that current does not care how you feel. It cares how you align. It does not soothe your nervous system. It rewires it. It does not validate your spiritual identity. It dissolves it. Kundalini is not here to make your life more magical. She is here to make it real. And reality does not always feel good. It feels necessary. The mystics did not awaken because they sought comfort. They awakened because they surrendered to what was already burning inside them. And in that fire, feeling became irrelevant. Only presence remained. Kundalini is the roar behind silence. It's what you feel when the world drops away and something unspeakable begins to breathe through you. You might tremble, you might cry, you might fall to your knees. But those are not signs of awakening. They are side effects of the ego breaking under pressure. The real force moves quietly, with intelligence older than time. And once she moves, she does not stop. Because this is not a bliss state. This is initiation. The ancient systems didn't treat it lightly. They didn't advertise it as a workshop or package it into playlists. They revered it. They feared it. They prepared for it with decades of purification, fasting, solitude, not to attract the force, but to survive it. Because when the current rises, it pulls everything that is false into its fire. Your relationships, your career, your beliefs, your cravings, your trauma. All of it surfaces not to punish, but to purify. The energy does not just move up, it moves through. And everything it touches is either transmuted or torn away. That's why the feelings you seek, the peace, the ecstasy, the clarity, come later, if at all. First comes the flood, the disorientation, the unmasking. First comes the shedding of the skin that called itself you. The force does not decorate your cage. It melts the bars. And if you confuse that melting for madness, you'll miss the miracle. You'll think something's wrong. You'll try to stop it, suppress it, diagnose it. But this can't be undone. Once awakened, Kundalini does not go back to sleep. She keeps moving, testing, teaching, asking, will you follow this current even when it terrifies you? Most won't. They'll return to comfort, to feeling, to control. Because force without surrender feels like chaos. But chaos is only order that no longer fits your illusion. You don't chase Kundalini. You build a life she can inhabit. And that life must be stable enough to hold a power that refuses to be managed. because this is not a weekend breakthrough. This is a complete metamorphosis of being. And it does not arrive in a way that makes sense. It arrives in a way that makes truth. Kundalini does not rise through ego. It rises through what remains once ego is stripped bare. And yet the ego clings. It performs awakening, decorates itself with wisdom, memorizes words it cannot embody. It wants the fire, but only if it doesn't get burned. It wants the power, but only if it doesn't have to die. And this is the trap. The ego thinks it can survive the awakening it pretends to seek. But Kundalini knows better. She waits for the death. Not physical death, but identity death. The slow unmasking of everything you thought was necessary for survival. Status, narrative, self-importance. The collapse of the roles you played so well you forgot you were acting. The unraveling of every belief that kept you tethered to who you weren't. The ego cannot carry the serpent. It is too small a vessel. This is why the process feels like falling apart. Why everything stable begins to shake. Because what's being threatened isn't your life. It's the illusion of who you thought you were. The persona built in reaction to trauma. The identity assembled from praise and punishment. The self that never existed except in defense. You don't ascend with the ego, you dissolve through it. The mystics knew this. That's why they warned in whispers, not shouts. Why initiation was veiled in metaphor. Not to be mysterious, but to protect you from rushing into something your ego wasn't ready to survive. Because the fire does not caress your image, it devours it. And if you try to take your false self into the furnace, it will scream. This is where the dark night begins, where the ego realizes it cannot lead, where your inner world becomes a battlefield. One part of you wants to let go, the other claws at control. Kundalini watches. She doesn't intervene. She tests. Are you willing to die, not to end, but to begin? This isn't about becoming better, it's about becoming real. The ego wants improvement. The soul wants truth, and truth requires a clearing, a purging, a purification so deep it shakes the foundations of everything you ever labeled mine. Your story, your gifts, your grief, all of it comes to the surface not to punish, but to be seen without distortion. Because the ego distorts even your healing, it claims progress, wears growth like a badge, turns awakening into a performance. But Kundalini sees through that. She bypasses the mask. And when she moves, she exposes every part of you that still clings to identity as armor. That's why the ego must die first, because what comes next cannot be negotiated. It cannot be branded, controlled, explained. It cannot be monetized or performed. It can only be embodied. And embodiment begins where performance ends, where feeling spiritual gives way to being spirit, where your hands move not from intention, but from source, where your words carry weight because you no longer speak from the mask, but from the marrow. This death is not a punishment, it's a return. Return to the silent space you came from, return to the awareness behind the name. Return to the knowing that doesn't need to be right, only real. And in that return, the serpent rises, not to decorate your awakening, but to burn away what you no longer need. The ego thinks death is the end, but Kundalini knows it's the gate, and you cannot pass through carrying who you were. You thought your pain was random, a byproduct of bad choices, bad timing, bad luck. You thought the heartbreaks were mistakes, the trauma, unfortunate, the anxiety, a flaw to be fixed. But suffering was never senseless. It was sacred curriculum, delivered in silence, wrapped in darkness, waiting for you to stop cursing it long enough to understand its language. Because Kundalini does not awaken through pleasure. She awakens through pressure. And pressure is always preceded by pain. The body breaks first, The illusion of control slips next. Then the stories fall apart. The ones you told yourself to make sense of the ache. The ones you rehearsed so well they became armor. But armor rusts under fire, and Kundalini is not here to preserve your defenses. She's here to expose the architecture of your avoidance. Pain is not the obstacle, it's the signal. That something inside you is knocking louder than you're willing to hear. That something buried beneath your survival strategies is trying to breathe again. Suffering is what happens when your soul outgrows your story and the story refuses to change. Kundalini listens for that moment. When your body begins to tremble, not from weakness, but from readiness. Because what you call unbearable, she calls initiation. The mystics knew this, that the wound was the womb, that the fire begins where the fracture occurs. That pain was not punishment, it was prophecy, an invitation to enter the part of you that has never been seen without judgment, the hidden self, the raw self, the one who still believes it's unworthy of the divine, and so suffering repeats itself, until it is heard, until it is held, until it no longer needs to scream. Not because the serpent needs your pain, but because your pain is the gate, the heat that burns through resistance, the weight that breaks the mind's grip just long enough for the soul to speak. And when it speaks, it does not use words, it uses sensation, grief, rage, silence so thick it carries memory older than this lifetime. Kundalini waits until your defenses are exhausted, until your ego lets go not by choice, but by collapse. And in that collapse, she moves, not to soothe, but to rewrite. And what she rewrites first is your relationship to pain. Because the fire doesn't just heal, it teaches. It teaches you to sit inside your sorrow without needing to solve it. It teaches you to breathe through panic and find presence on the other side. It teaches you to stop begging for escape and start listening for the lesson, not in your head, but in your bones. Because that's where the truth has been hiding. Inside the ache you've tried to numb, inside the memory you refuse to name. There is no awakening without discomfort, not because suffering is noble, but because it is necessary. Because without pain, you'd never stop pretending. Without grief, you'd never slow down enough to feel. Without the darkness, you'd keep chasing light and calling it depth. Kundalini rises through what you've buried, not around it, through it. And every tear that falls is holy. Every trigger, sacred. Every spiral, part of the sequence. There is intelligence in the chaos, design in the breakdown. And the serpent? She is not coming to save you from suffering. She is coming to show you that you are already standing on the very ground where healing begins. The wound is not in the way. It is the way. You always thought truth would arrive in words. That understanding would come through thoughts. That clarity would descend like logic into your mind and rearrange your confusion into a neat, spoken sequence. But Kundalini does not speak in language. She is language. And when she moves, words become inadequate. Only energy remains. This is when you begin to feel things you can't explain. Tingles in places untouched. A pulse at the base of your spine. A hum beneath your skin. You open your mouth, but nothing comes out, because there is no vocabulary for what's occurring inside you. This is not emotion, not intuition, not even insight. It's a transmission, a download in frequencies your intellect cannot translate. The body understands before the brain does. The energy shifts, and suddenly you know something, not mentally but wholly, not because it was taught, but because it was remembered, like a memory you never made, like a truth too deep for words but too loud to ignore. And this is when everything begins to feel unfamiliar, because the old language breaks. You can't talk your way through this, because what's happening now is not a thought, it's a current, a serpent winding through the spine, touching places the conscious mind was never allowed to see. She doesn't deliver information, she delivers realignment. And with every inch she rises, she unearths what you've silenced. Your heart begins to speak, but not in sentences. It speaks in floods, in images, in heat, in grief that pours from nowhere and everywhere at once. The body becomes the text. The breath becomes the mantra. And suddenly you're listening, not to your thoughts, but to something older, wilder, more precise. A voice without tone, a message without syntax, a truth that breaks through every lie you've spoken in the name of keeping peace. You are not going crazy. You are learning a new alphabet. Because the serpent doesn't use grammar. She uses pressure, uses movement, uses vibration. And you feel her in your hips when the rage rises, in your throat when the truth burns, in your back when the past pushes through your posture. These are not symptoms. They are signals. The energy is becoming language. And that language speaks in paradox. You feel both ancient and newborn, both grounded and unraveling. You are terrified, yet certain. Lost, yet seen. There is no consistency in this phase, only current. One moment you're crying without cause, the next silent with awe. You aren't failing. You're being retuned. Your nervous system is learning how to listen. And listening in this phase means feeling everything. Not analyzing it, not fixing it, not escaping it with spiritual bypass or borrowed mantras. It means letting the energy speak in its own native tongue. Letting your cells translate the message, letting the tears interpret what language cannot. The mystics knew this phase. They called it madness not because it was insane, but because it broke the intellect's hold. They whispered about energy as communication, as initiation, as sacred literacy. They knew that truth isn't learned, it's received. And Kundalini is the courier. This is why you're forgetting how to explain, because the truth you're remembering is not explainable. It's livable, it's felt, it's encoded in how you walk, how you weep, how you hold yourself without needing to be understood. You no longer need the sentence. You become the signal. This is when energy becomes language, and silence becomes scripture. You whisper it to yourself in the quiet moments. You wonder if you're losing it. The dreams too vivid, the emotions too sharp, the body no longer yours, pulsing with heat, trembling without cause. You forget names, time slips, lights flicker when you walk into the room, and everyone around you seems to be reading from a script you can no longer follow. You don't fit the language of your old life anymore. But this is not madness. This is recalibration. You are not unraveling. You are being reassembled, not from the outside in, but from the root upward. Kundalini does not rise into a mind unprepared. She first breaks the circuits that no longer serve, the neurological grooves carved by trauma, the reactive patterns etched by repetition, the silent loops of self-sabotage you thought were personality. This is not dysfunction, it is upgrade. But upgrades don't come quietly. They come like storms, like power outages before the lights come back stronger. You feel raw because the armor has fallen. You feel exposed because the layers are gone. You feel untethered because the identity you wore like skin has finally peeled. This is not a breakdown. It is a reboot. The serpent does not ask if you are ready. She moves when the lie is too loud to live with. And when she coils upward, your nervous system becomes her canvas. She paints with current, with breath, with pulses of memory long buried in your spine. And the body shakes, not in fear, but in release. You are being rewired. And the rewiring doesn't follow your calendar. It doesn't care about your job, your relationships, your plans. It interrupts what no longer aligns. It dissolves what cannot survive your next level of truth. And it feels like death, because the self you protected is being erased. But in the empty space, something ancient returns. You stop needing permission to feel. You stop apologizing for your sensitivity. You start hearing your own heartbeat like a language. The energy moves before thought, and you know what is true before you can explain why. Your body becomes the compass, your breath the guide, and slowly the chaos gives way to coherence, not silence but symphony. Because rewiring is not quiet, it's wild. The dreams intensify, the visions surge, the emotions don't wait their turn, they arrive in floods. But underneath it all, there's a new signal forming, a deeper rhythm, a steady pulse rising through the noise. It doesn't speak in reassurance, it speaks in resonance. You are not unstable, you are unfiltered. For the first time, you are experiencing reality without the numbness, without the performance, without the mental firewall that once kept truth at bay. And it hurts, yes, but only because you're feeling everything you used to bury. This is what the mystics meant when they said awakening costs you everything, because the price of clarity is the loss of illusion, and the loss of illusion feels like insanity, until it doesn't, until you realize that everyone else is sleepwalking, and you are simply awake, overstimulated, overexposed, overfeeling, but awake. And once you see through the veil, you cannot unsee it. This is not a condition to medicate, it's a metamorphosis to integrate. The mind thinks it's breaking, but the soul knows it's remembering. You are not going crazy. You are remembering how to feel. And in that remembrance, the circuitry of your being is coming back online. They were never just dreams, not the ones that felt too vivid, not the ones that woke you at 3:33 with a heart pounding like it had seen something real, not the ones where symbols chased you, where you flew without wings, where someone called your name in a voice older than your mother's. These were not stories from the subconscious. They were letters, codes, messages from the parts of you that could no longer wait for your waking self to listen. Because when Kundalini stirs, the veil thins, and the dreams begin to speak, not in straight lines or tidy metaphors, but in waves, in images, in riddles wrapped in energy. You don't dream for escape anymore. You dream for transmission, for activation, and every symbol you once ignored now glows with urgency. The snake underfoot, the spiral staircases, the falling, the drowning, the endless running with no destination. These are not fears. These are maps drawn by the soul. Kundalini doesn't just move through your body, she moves through your sleep. Because sleep is where the ego loosens its grip, where the gate between worlds swings open just wide enough for truth to slip through. In dreams, the mind can't control the message. That's why the serpent chooses the night. She needs you unguarded. And that's when you start to notice the dreams don't feel like dreams anymore. They feel like places, like memories, like instructions. You wake up with sentences still echoing in your ribs. You see faces you've never met, but somehow miss. You wake weeping, laughing, shaking, not because of what happened, but because of what returned. You're not imagining it, you're receiving it. The mystics trained themselves to dream, not to escape, but to enter, to cross into the astral, not for fantasy, but for prophecy. They called dreams the second tongue of spirit. And they knew, when Kundalini stirs, she doesn't just rewrite your day. She rearranges your night. You are being taught while you sleep. You are being reminded while you rest. The dreams become classroom, confessional, crucible. Sometimes they soothe, yes, but often they confront. They show you your shadow. They replay old pain from lifetimes you've never named. They introduce you to beings who speak without mouths and offer truths without mercy. And you wake not rested, but reborn. And yet you still doubt, still call them just dreams, because your conditioning runs deep. You were taught to dismiss the irrational, to file away the miraculous, to ignore the symbols dancing behind your eyelids like they weren't your soul trying to get a message through the static. But the message doesn't stop just because you label it fantasy. The serpent speaks in dreams because your daylight self refuses to listen. And the question is no longer, was that real? It's, why do I only believe what I can explain? You don't have to understand the dream to be changed by it. You only have to honor it, journal it, feel it, breathe it back into your waking life. Because what happens at night isn't separate from your path. It is the path. And the more you listen, the clearer it gets. The more you respond, the more it responds to you. The dream world sharpens, the symbols repeat, the lessons deepen, and soon the line between sleep and wake begins to blur. Because when Kundalini rises, she doesn't leave any dimension untouched, not even your dreams. They drew them in secret, carved them into stone, painted them onto cave walls, not as art, but as instruction. Spirals, serpents, ladders made of bone and breath. Not one culture, all of them, Egypt, India, Tibet, the Amazon, the Dogon, scattered across time, but whispering the same thing. That the spine was not just a structure, it was scripture, because the ancients knew Kundalini lives here. Not in the abstract, not in the metaphorical, but in the marrow. Coiled at the base like a hidden glyph, the serpent waits. And the spine is her scroll. Each vertebra, a gate, each curve, a waveform, each chakra, a seal coded with memory. You are carrying sacred geometry inside your body, and you were never taught to read it. Modern anatomy calls it function, but the mystics called it flame, called it ladder, called it Jed, Sushumna, the tree of life, the staff of Hermes, the axis mundi, different names, same knowing. The spine is the channel through which divinity climbs. Not heaven descending into man, but man ascending into truth. And Kundalini? She is the reader of that scroll. But she doesn't read with eyes, she reads with fire, with frequency, with friction. She moves vertebra by vertebra, not to rise, but to unlock, to open the sealed doors of remembrance. And with every pulse of her ascent, a memory wakes, a wound surfaces, a pattern breaks, and the spine becomes an altar of transformation. This is why your body shakes when the truth hits, why your back aches during certain meditations, why pressure builds at the base of the skull when you're on the edge of insight. The serpent is climbing, and your spine is responding. But most ignore it. They want the vision, not the vessel. Want the download, not the discipline. But the spine doesn't open for spectacle. It opens for sincerity, for stillness, for silence that listens to the body's ancient language. Because the spine speaks, and Kundalini answers only when it's heard. You were taught to sit up straight in school, but not why. Not that alignment opens current, not that posture is prayer, not that the spine is a filament waiting for voltage. But the yogis knew, the Taoists knew, the medicine people knew. They built entire systems around it, not as superstition, but as science of spirit. The symbols were never decoration, they were diagrams. They mapped the invisible. They encoded the truth in pattern, knowing the body would one day remember. And that's what's happening now. You're not awakening, you're decoding, feeling the spine not as bone but as bridge, recognizing the buzzing between the shoulder blades not as tension but transmission. You are being tuned, you are being read. And the serpent is climbing the text you never knew was sacred, not from desire, from design, because your body was never random, it was a manuscript. And the spine was always the title page. You were taught they were wheels of light, painted in pastels, arranged in a rainbow, red to violet, root to crown, 7 neat centers, each with its own mood board, affirmation, and healing crystal. And somewhere along the way, the sacred was simplified. The chakras were reduced to color-coded lifestyle content. But the ancients didn't color-coordinate energy. They worshipped it, not as abstraction but as intelligence, as gates, as guardians, Because the chakras were never just colors, they were thresholds. Seals placed over ancient memory, vortices of encoded trauma, dormant gifts, ancestral memory, and karmic instruction. Each one a temple, each one guarded not by symbol, but by your willingness to feel what you've buried. You don't open chakras by visualizing light. You open them by touching truth. The root doesn't open because you chanted the right syllable. It opens when you confront the fear that keeps your body clenched, your lineage heavy, your survival frantic. The sacral doesn't spin because you wore orange. It awakens when you stop using pleasure to escape pain and let yourself feel the grief in your hips. The solar plexus doesn't shine just because you spoke a mantra into the mirror. It ignites when you stop giving away your power to people you want to please. These are not colors, these are codes, and each one holds a test. Kundalini knows this. She doesn't blast through the system all at once. She pauses, she coils, she probes, because each chakra isn't a hallway, it's a crucible, a place where falsehood burns before passage is granted. You cannot skip, you cannot bypass. The serpent waits until the gatekeeper is ready to kneel, and the gatekeeper is always you. This is why awakening hurts, why the energy gets stuck, why your heart clenches when love tries to enter, why your throat dries when truth wants out, why your crown feels closed even after all the meditation. Because the body remembers what the mind pretends to forget. And the chakras are not passive. They hold that memory like sealed doors. They don't open because you want enlightenment. They open because you're finally honest. And honesty is the lubricant of awakening. The mystics didn't open their chakras for balance. They opened them for liberation. They fasted. They breathed. They sat in silence until the body spoke in symbols and energy responded. They understood each center not as a circle, but as a spiral, a layered vortex of lessons repeating until they were embodied, not just understood. The energy rises only when the truth is felt. And the truth doesn't live in affirmations. It lives in your resistance, in your tension, in the sensations you try to regulate with logic. The tight chest, the blocked belly, the numb pelvis. These are not malfunctions. These are messages. Your body is trying to finish the sentences your mind keeps interrupting. And Kundalini listens for that silence. The moment the ego stops translating, the moment the story breaks, that's when the seal cracks. That's when the next center begins to hum, not with light, but with life. Real life, the kind that pulses, weeps, shakes, and remembers. You are not ascending through chakras, you are descending into them, reclaiming each one not as a staircase, but as a home. You're not just aligning your energy, you're integrating your soul, because the chakras were never decoration, they were design. And the colors? They were never meant to please your eyes. They were warnings, they were invitations, they were fire. You were told sex was desire, told it was pleasure, performance, possession. Something to chase, something to fear, something to repress or romanticize. But no one told you the real secret. That sexual energy is not just biology, it's voltage. The same current that spins the galaxies, that pulses through atoms, that rises as Kundalini. Sacred, electric, untamed. And what you do with that current determines whether it becomes a portal or a prison. Because sexuality is not separate from spirituality, it is the root of it. Not a side path, not a distraction, but the base frequency from which all higher expressions rise. And when Kundalini stirs, she does not skip the sacral. She begins there, in the hips, in the blood, in the pulse behind the navel. Because if the base is unstable, the whole temple collapses. You feel it as heat, as hunger, as ache that isn't about touch, but truth. This is not about sex acts, it's about energy. And most of the world has been conditioned to either suppress or exploit that energy. Both are distortions. One creates shame, the other creates addiction. Neither creates liberation, and Kundalini cannot rise through distortion. When she meets blocked or misused sexual energy, she doesn't punish. She pauses, because that current, if twisted, becomes chaotic. It feeds illusions, it spirals into projection, into fantasy, into craving without clarity. And what could have been a doorway becomes a loop. The prison is always the loop, looping through old patterns of desire, looping through shame dressed as kink, or power dressed as seduction, looping through unspoken wounds, trying to resolve themselves through someone else's body. These are not sins, they are signals. The serpent doesn't judge, but she doesn't bypass either. She'll rise only as far as your integrity allows. And integrity, here, means presence, awareness, reverence. It means feeling the sacredness of your own arousal not as entertainment, but as instruction, because sexual energy doesn't just want to move outward, it wants to rise inward, and if you let it, it will. It will climb your spine like liquid light. It will open gates you didn't know existed. It will dissolve the separation between pleasure and presence. And in that rising, your body will become not an object, but a temple again, the kind where gods used to speak. The mystics knew this. The tantrikas, the yoginis, the alchemists, they didn't separate flesh from spirit. They infused it. They knew that orgasm was not climax, but surrender. That the merging of energies was not about conquest, but communion. That the seed, when retained and refined, could awaken the entire system. But modern minds weren't taught this. You were taught to chase the release, to pour out your power without purpose, to seek others for completion, to mistake friction for connection. And in doing so, you scattered your fire. But scattered fire still burns. It burns as longing, as confusion, as cycles of intimacy that never touch your soul. And the serpent, she waits for the day you stop outsourcing your aliveness, waits for the moment you stop calling lust liberation, waits for the silence that comes when you finally ask, what is this energy for? Because it was never about sex, it was always about power. Your power. And now the question becomes, will you offer it to illusion, or will you offer it to the flame? You've seen them, those who tried to rise too fast, who mistook peak states for permanence, who chased the fire before they'd cleared the fuel, who pushed, forced, summoned the serpent without building a temple that could hold her. You watched them glow too brightly, too quickly, and then disappear into confusion, into mania, into silence. Because Kundalini is not to be awakened. She awakens you, and if you try to force her, she doesn't submit. She retaliates, not out of cruelty but correction, not as punishment but protection. The system collapses not because the energy is wrong, but because the vessel is unprepared. This isn't power you can play with. It isn't a supplement. It isn't a high. It isn't a technique you learn from a weekend certification. It's sacred technology. It's sacred intelligence. It scans every corner of your being for stability, for sincerity, for structure. And if it finds weakness, it magnifies it. If it finds distortion, it surges through it like a storm through shattered glass. People confuse symptoms for progress. The shaking, the visions, the spontaneous weeping, they think they've awakened. But the serpent doesn't just rise through movement, she rises through maturity. And maturity requires patience, requires preparation, requires presence. Without these, the force that could liberate you will dismantle you. Because Kundalini doesn't only move upward, she moves in all directions, through psyche, memory, emotion, soul. And if the psyche isn't integrated, if the shadow isn't held, if the nervous system isn't strong, she exposes everything, all at once. And what was meant to be gradual becomes violent. You can't shortcut truth. You can't skip the grief, the grounding, the discipline. You can't jump to transcendence without digesting the weight of what you still carry. The trauma, the defense mechanisms, the spiritual ego, the buried fear of losing control, because Kundalini will trigger all of it. And if you're not ready, you won't know how to hold the mirror she hands you. The mystics trained for decades before touching the serpent, not because they feared her, but because they respected her. They fasted, prayed, cleansed. They knew the temple had to be prepared, that the foundation had to be strong, because the energy doesn't fix you, it reveals you, and what it reveals can overwhelm you if you've mistaken stimulation for awakening. This is the danger. Chasing the rise before embodying the root, mistaking intensity for initiation, forcing the current before learning how to contain it. People light the fuse before they've checked the structure, and then wonder why they implode. This is not a warning to scare you, it's a warning to slow you down, because real awakening is not flashy. It's quiet, it's layered, it's humbling. It doesn't need to be proven, it doesn't ask for attention, it doesn't post updates. It whispers, "Prepare your house. The fire is coming." And that house is your mind, your breath, your body, your life. If you rush, you will rupture. If you force, you will fracture. But if you wait, if you build, if you ground into the truth without urgency, the serpent will rise not in chaos, but in grace. And you'll know, not because you feel powerful, but because you finally feel real. No one tells you that the place that hurts the most is often the place the fire enters. That the wound you've spent years hiding, managing, suppressing, is the very threshold where Kundalini waits. She doesn't avoid trauma. She coils beside it. Not as a trigger, but as a key. Because the pain you survived isn't just a scar, it's a signal. And the signal doesn't say, broken. It says ready. Ready to be seen, ready to be felt, ready to be burned clean. But the world taught you the opposite. It told you to move on, to heal quietly, to patch the cracks and smile brighter. It told you trauma was something to escape, to fix, to label and contain. But what if it was more than that? What if trauma wasn't the blockage but the portal? Because where there is rupture, there is room. And Kundalini moves through what is open, not polished. The fire rises not because you are perfect, but because you are pierced. And in that piercing lives access. This is the truth no one speaks. That trauma softens the shell, that it exposes the fault lines of the self. And those fault lines, painful as they are, allow the energy to enter. Not to re-traumatize, but to rewire, to repattern, to teach you that the place of deepest vulnerability is also the place of greatest transformation. But only if you stop numbing it. Only if you sit with it, not as a victim, but as a witness. Kundalini doesn't heal trauma by erasing it. She heals it by illuminating it, by pulling it from the depths of your fascia, your memory, your energy body. She brings the trembling to the surface, the rage, the grief, the forgotten screams stored in your spine. And she does this not to hurt you, but to unfreeze you. Because trauma isn't just pain, it's stagnation, it's life force caught in a loop. A loop that says, "I'm not safe." A loop that tightens around your joy, your voice, your breath. And Kundalini? She doesn't tolerate loops, she uncoils them. One spiral at a time, until what was stuck begins to move, until what was locked begins to breathe. But the process isn't pretty. It feels like regression. It feels like breakdown. It feels like being thrown into memories you thought you had buried well enough to forget. But forgetting is not healing, and suppression is not peace. The fire won't allow you to lie to yourself anymore. She will return you to the scene of the freeze, not to punish you, but to retrieve you, to show you that the part of you that shattered didn't die. It waited for you to become strong enough to return with eyes open, with breath steady, with a nervous system that could hold what was once too much. This is sacred reclamation. This is where awakening isn't a concept, but a confrontation. And the serpent? She coils beside every trauma site, asking one question. Can you hold what you once ran from? If the answer is yes, not all at once, but slowly, breath by breath, she rises. Not to destroy your trauma story, but to rewrite it. Not from fear, from fire. There comes a moment in the path where everything goes quiet, not peaceful, not resolved, just still. The noise that once screamed, gone. The emotions that surged, frozen. The fire that moved, dimmed. And you think, maybe it's over. Maybe the storm passed. Maybe the serpent returned to sleep. Maybe the worst is behind you. But silence, here, is not conclusion. It is prelude. This is the breath before the collapse, the pause before the quake, the eye of the hurricane where the ego dares to believe it has survived what it never understood. But Kundalini isn't finished. She's only waiting. Because real transformation doesn't happen in chaos alone. It happens in the silence after, when the system begins to reorganize around a deeper truth. And truth doesn't rush, so she lets you sit. In the hollow, in the aftermath, in the space between what has died and what hasn't yet taken form. This is the cocoon, the chrysalis, the void. It feels like nothing, but inside the nothing, everything is being recoded. You don't realize it until you try to go back. Back to your routines, back to your masks, back to the people who knew the previous version of you, and you find yourself unable to re-enter the life you once begged to keep. It no longer fits, not because the world changed, but because you did, quietly, irrevocably. The silence rewired your thresholds. You tolerate less, you hear more, you speak less, you feel more. You're raw in a way no outer layer can contain, and no one sees it. They think you're stable, calm. They don't see the tectonic shifts beneath your stillness. But that's how the serpent moves in this phase, without spectacle, without sound. This is the most dangerous stage. Because you start to believe nothing's happening. You start to grasp for intensity again. You crave the signs, the symbols, the synchronicities. But none come. The magic goes mute. The body goes cold. The visions dissolve into ordinary. And the mind panics, not realizing that the fire has gone inward. This is the restructuring. The spine quiets. The breath deepens. The dreams fade. And in their place, silence like stone. This is where most seekers give up. Call it burnout, call it disconnection. Try to restart the process with more practices, more rituals, more effort. But effort here is violence. What's required now is stillness. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything is. You are not lost. You are inside the reset. Kundalini is watching, not from below, but from within. She's observing the system reorient, testing its integrity, waiting to see if you can be still without slipping back into sleep, waiting to see if you can trust without proof. Because trust here is the proof. You are in the silence before the next storm, and the storm will come, not as punishment but as passage, because you are being prepared to carry more voltage, more truth, more clarity. And that requires more stillness than you've ever been willing to hold. This is not the end of the journey. This is the deep breath before the next plunge, and only those who stop searching long enough to feel it will survive what comes next. There's a moment when the fire no longer feels like something that visits you, no longer a rising, an event, a sensation you chase or fear. One day you wake up, and it's in you, not moving, being. You're not waiting for Kundalini to rise anymore, because she's not coiled in the base, she's blooming in the core, and you realize the altar you bowed to was never out there. It was always your own spine. You are the temple, you are the priest, You are the offering, and you are the flame. It's not poetic, it's cellular. The breath no longer moves just oxygen, it moves intention. The steps you take feel sculpted. The words you speak taste like prophecy. You walk through rooms with the quiet weight of someone who knows they're being lit from within. Not special, not chosen, just remembered. And when you're remembered, you don't need to perform. You don't need to explain. You stop needing to feel spiritual because everything becomes sacred by default. Folding laundry, sitting in traffic, touching your chest when no one is watching. These are now rituals, not because you label them, but because the fire does. Kundalini doesn't just burn through illusion, she anoints presence. And presence makes everything holy. This is when you stop chasing experiences, you stop trying to force energy, you stop seeking peak states. You realize they were all echoes of what you already are. The bliss, the tears, the visions, they were reminders. But the truth is deeper, quieter, slower. It hums in your bones, in your gaze, in the way you listen with your skin. You don't rise anymore, you radiate, because the fire no longer rises to you. It moves through you, as you. It becomes how you make decisions, how you sense when to speak and when to hold silence, how you recognize another being's soul before they even open their mouth. You don't try to shine, you just are the light. Not metaphor, reality. Because this energy doesn't just purify, it inhabits. It sits in your belly like a throne. It coils in your spine like scripture. It lives behind your eyes like a presence. You stop being the seeker. You become the flame others recognize without understanding why. And they will ask you, what changed? You'll try to answer. You'll mention meditation, breathwork, tears, silence. But the truth won't fit in sentences, because the truth isn't what happened to you. The truth is what you've become. You are the altar, not because you chose it, but because you allowed the fire to make you hollow enough to hold something ancient, something alive. And when the serpent sees that, she stays. She no longer stirs, she rests, she watches, she burns clean. This is not a plateau, it's embodiment. And embodiment is the highest form of initiation. You are no longer a visitor to the sacred. You are the sacred, carved open and lit from the inside. Not everything that glows is truth. Not every vision is wisdom. Not every high is awakening. This is the part no one wants to admit, that spiritual experiences can deceive. That light, when untethered, becomes illusion, that the ego knows how to wear a halo. And when Kundalini begins to rise, one of her first tasks is to show you the difference, because the path is filled with mirrors, and not all of them are clean. The false light arrives first. It flatters, it floods, it makes you feel chosen, special, elevated. You hear the voice, you feel the current, you see the geometry behind your eyelids, and for a moment you believe you've made it. You've awakened, you're done. But Kundalini doesn't rise to crown you. She rises to crucify what cannot carry truth. And the first truth is this: most of what you called light was just stimulation. Energy without integration, insight without embodiment, vision without responsibility. You saw the symbols, but you didn't live them. You touched the mystic, but never fed the human. And the serpent? She knows. She waits. Because real initiation begins where false light ends. It begins when the visions stop, when the bliss fades, when the fire quiets, and you're left alone with your choices. When you wake up on an ordinary morning with no fireworks, no downloads, no signs. Just a question. Can you live the truth you glimpsed without needing to feel it every moment to prove it's real? The false light needs confirmation. The real light needs consistency. False light makes you perform, makes you speak like a prophet but react like a child, makes you quote Rumi but avoid your mother's phone calls. False light wants spotlight. Real light wants silence. Kundalini exposes this contrast not with judgment but with fire. She will flood you with bliss only to see what you cling to. She'll give you visions only to watch what you idolize. She'll amplify your power just enough to test your humility. And if she finds ego clothed in enlightenment, she burns it, not to destroy you, but to prepare you for what's real. Because real initiation isn't what happens during the ceremony. It's what you do when the incense is gone, when the circle is closed, when the teacher leaves and the ordinary world returns. It's how you breathe when no one is watching, how you treat people who don't understand your journey, how you hold yourself in the silence when no signs appear. The real light is quiet. It moves like breath through the spine, like stillness through the storm. It doesn't need to be felt. It is. And when you find it, it doesn't elevate you above others. It dissolves the need to compare at all. You stop trying to convince. You start listening deeper. You stop craving peak states. You start respecting slow ones. And Kundalini? She begins to trust you. She doesn't just rise, she rests. Not because you've arrived, but because you've surrendered. Because the part of you that needed to shine has finally gone dark. And in that darkness, the true light begins to move. Not around you, but as you. And that is the real initiation. There's a point no one speaks of, a threshold that cannot be bypassed, cannot be ritualized, cannot be softened by mantras or made pretty by practice. It doesn't care how long you've meditated, how clean your diet is, or how many past lives you've remembered. It waits in silence. Always. And when you arrive, you will know. Because something ancient will rise to meet you, not as teacher, not as angel, not as serpent, but as guardian. And the guardian doesn't ask for reverence. It demands truth. This is the gate between what you've become and what you truly are. Not metaphor, not myth. A metaphysical checkpoint encoded into the very structure of spiritual ascent. In Kabbalah, it's the abyss. In Tantra, the fierce deity. In Hermetics, the dweller. In every system that understood real transformation, there was always a test before integration. And the test is not external. It is you. Magnified, mirrored, confronted, all at once. The parts of you still hidden, the attachments still clinging, the lies you told to feel enlightened, the secrets you thought you buried deep enough to avoid. The guardian holds no weapon, because your own shadow is the blade. This is not a battle, it is a reckoning, and you cannot pass by force. The gate only opens when the performance ends, when you stop reaching for light and let the dark tell its story, when you drop the language of growth and speak the language of surrender. Not, I am ready, but I am nothing. Because only nothing can enter. And the serpent? She coils at this gate, not to challenge the guardian, but to stand with it. Because Kundalini doesn't just rise in fire, she kneels in shadow. She kneels beside your fear and asks, can you hold this? Beside your guilt, will you claim this? Beside your shame, will you love this? Not to fix it, but to finally see it? You cannot fake your way past the gate. You cannot spiritual bypass the guardian. And if you try, the current recedes. Not as punishment, but protection. Because what waits beyond this point cannot be carried with delusion. The guardian will show you everything, and you will want to turn back. But if you don't, if you stay still, something will shift. The gate won't swing open, it will dissolve, because the truth is, there is no gate, there is no guardian, there is only your reflection, sharpened by fire, softened by surrender. And when you look into it without flinching, the threshold disappears. And Kundalini moves. She does not rise like lightning here, she flows like prayer. Because what comes next is not an ascent, it's a becoming. You've passed the point of theory, you've crossed the line between seeker and soul. And now the question is no longer, will you awaken? It is, Will you remain awake when the world no longer mirrors your light? You wanted healing to feel like peace, like closure, like the soft landing after a long fall. But Kundalini doesn't offer you peace first, she offers you truth. And truth, when it's been buried for lifetimes, doesn't arrive as comfort. It arrives as combustion, not to wound you, but to show you where you were already bleeding. Awakening hurts because it has to, not because the divine is cruel, but because the false self doesn't die quietly. It clings, it cries, it begs to be preserved, and Kundalini, with her infinite intelligence, doesn't soothe it. She scorches it. She floods the nervous system with everything you suppressed, the grief, the rage, the memories that whisper at the edge of consciousness. And suddenly, you're not just feeling pain, you're remembering it. From this life, from others, from your lineage, from the collective weight of forgetting who you are. You wake with tears on your face and no story to attach them to. You walk through the day with your chest cracked open, exposed to invisible winds, and it feels like you're breaking, like you're failing, like you're falling apart. But you're not falling apart. You're falling into the space where healing doesn't mean fixing. It means feeling, into the center of your body, where the pain was stored, waiting for the one brave enough to stop numbing it. Into the root of the fire, where Kundalini coils and whispers, "I cannot rise through what you refuse to touch." So she pushes, she burns, she disorients. Your digestion falters, your sleep shatters. Relationships end, beliefs disintegrate. And there's no manual for this, no checklist, only the deep knowing that something real is happening and it cannot be reversed. This is where many turn back, because the pain isn't dramatic, it's sacred. The hurt isn't loud, it's precise. It peels, it presses, it humbles. And the world doesn't see it. They think you're fine, or worse, they think you're unstable. Because awakening doesn't look like success, it looks like surrender. It looks like sitting on your floor at 3 a.m., whispering prayers into the dark, not for answers, but for strength to keep going. And still the serpent rises, because pain isn't the end. It's the entrance. It's what softens the shell, what shatters the illusion that strength is suppression. It opens you, not to suffering, but to sensation. And within sensation, you rediscover your own capacity to hold yourself. This is the medicine. Not that the pain ends, but that it no longer defines you. You don't heal by escaping the fire. You heal by becoming it, by letting it burn through what isn't you, by standing inside the flame and realizing it was never here to consume you. It was here to purify you. And once it does, the hurt no longer hurts the same. It becomes light, the kind of light that doesn't blind or brag, but warms from within, the kind that rises not as a blaze, but as clarity. You were looking for sacred texts, scrolls, sutras, scriptures written by mystics, spoken by gods, buried in stone, or whispered through time. But the most ancient scripture was never written on paper. It was etched into your body, line by line, curve by curve. And it stands vertical in the center of your being, carrying more wisdom than any book ever could. Your spine is the original manuscript. Each vertebra, a syllable in the sentence of your becoming. Each curve, a prayer written in posture. Each space between the bones, a pause where truth waits to enter. It does not ask to be studied. It asks to be remembered, felt, awakened. Kundalini does not rise randomly. She reads you. She traces the script you forgot how to feel. She moves only when the lines are ready, when the page of your body has been cleansed of pretense, of rigidity, of all the edits you made to survive. She waits until the spine can sing. And it does sing, through tremors, through alignment, through the silent electricity that flows when breath meets presence. You were never meant to bend your spine for obedience. You were meant to bow in reverence to yourself. Because this column is not mechanical, it is mystical. In Egypt, it was Djed, the backbone of Osiris, the pillar of resurrection. In yogic maps, it is Sushumna, the central channel through which the serpent climbs. In Kabbalah, it reflects the tree of life. In every ancient system, it was the same message whispered in different tongues. This structure is sacred. But modern minds made it structural, erased the magic, called it posture, anatomy, referred to the body as machine, forgetting that the spine is not just the conduit of physical impulses, but spiritual instructions. The fire rises along this script. And when the script is clear, when the nervous system is soft but strong, when the breath flows without force, when the awareness has settled into the body, the story begins to tell itself. Visions come not from imagination, but from activation. Clarity doesn't descend from the heavens. It spirals upward, through the bone, through the breath, through the spine like light reading its own reflection. And when you feel that, you'll know. You're not remembering ideas. You're remembering architecture. Every posture becomes prayer. Every stretch becomes verse. Every shiver becomes a transmission. The body begins to recite what the mind could never translate. And Kundalini, now fully alive within you, no longer rises with effort. She rises through alignment. This is the deeper reason the mystics spent lifetimes training the body, not to master it, but to decode it. They bowed not to gods, but to the temple within. They understood that the spine doesn't just hold the body up. It holds the soul in place. And when that soul is ready to rise, it moves through the only path it's ever known, the living scripture you carry within you every single day. You don't need new teachings. You need to sit in silence and listen to the spine. Some nights you leave your body, not in fantasy but in function, not to escape, but to remember. And when you return, it's with sand in your lungs from deserts you've never walked, with the weight of ancient eyes still watching, with a phrase you can't pronounce echoing in your chest like it once belonged to you. You try to call it a dream, but it wasn't a dream. It was instruction. Because when Kundalini rises, the veil between sleep and soul thins, and what once felt like subconscious theater becomes something else. A classroom, a trial, a memory field. You don't just dream, you travel. And the places you go aren't creations of your mind. They are stations of your becoming. You speak languages you've never studied. You solve riddles without knowing how. You meet beings that look at you not like a stranger, but like someone late to return. You wake up exhausted, not from rest but from work. And you begin to suspect, this isn't just the mind processing the day. This is the soul processing lifetimes. These dreams aren't dreams. They're initiations. The mystics called them astral journeys. The Tibetans mapped them in the Bardo. The Egyptians guided souls through their nightly gates. In all traditions that remembered, the night was not for sleep. It was for training, for contact, for the work that could not be done with words or woken eyes. And Kundalini? She uses the dream time the way a sculptor uses stillness. Because when the body rests, the inner structure loosens. The ego releases its grip. And what rises is not fantasy, it's forgotten reality. This is why your dreams shift when the fire stirs. They become louder, sharper, less symbolic, more instructional. You stop dreaming about surface fears and start receiving geometry. Timelines, maps of energy moving through the spine. You dream of climbing stairs that never end, of meeting teachers who test you without speaking, of symbols that follow you back into waking life. And the real test? You don't know which world is more real, because the dream feels more vivid than your job, your kitchen, your morning commute, because the emotions linger, the instructions stick, the visions haunt, not with fear, but with familiarity. You begin to feel like something is tracking your progress, and it is. Because Kundalini doesn't sleep. She uses your sleep to show you what the daylight self resists, to bypass the logic, to update the code, to rehearse the becoming that your waking self isn't ready to hold just yet. But dream by dream, you change. You wake up with clarity you didn't earn logically. You avoid decisions you would have made a week ago. You meet someone and feel as though you've already had a conversation. Because you have. Just not in this dimension. You are being shaped at night. And the more you listen, the more the line between sleep and vision dissolves. Until you stop asking, was that a dream? And start asking, what did I receive? Because the dream is no longer just an escape. It is a meeting. And what meets you there is not always kind, but always sacred. You never saw your pain as precise. You thought it was random, chaotic, a series of accidents stitched together by bad timing and worse luck. But pain is not chaos. Not to Kundalini. To her, pain is pattern. It is placement. It is a signal repeated until it's recognized, until it echoes through your nervous system like an unfinished equation waiting to be solved. Suffering is not senseless. It is sacred geometry in disguise. Look closer. Every time you broke, it followed a pattern. The same flavor of betrayal, the same abandonment with different names, the same tightness in the chest when love walks in, the same silence after you speak your truth. These are not coincidences. They are coordinates. Your soul has been mapping you back to yourself the whole time, and Kundalini, she doesn't erase the pattern. She amplifies it, not to torture, but to reveal, to pull the fractal out of hiding, to hold it to the light until you finally see. The shape of your suffering is trying to teach you something. The mystics knew this. That pain wasn't punishment. It was a mandala, a spiral that returns not to trap you, but to refine you. Every heartbreak, a circle. Every loss, a spoke. Every descent into darkness, a return to the center where the fire lives. It's not linear. It never was. It's spiral alchemy, sacred geometry unfolding in motion. You break in the same places because those places are doors. Kundalini doesn't destroy to destroy. She destroys to disarm, to dismantle the false scaffolding around the soul so that the original structure can reassemble along its divine proportions. The body knows this. It swells, trembles, contracts at exact moments, not randomly but in rhythm, because suffering moves in cycles. And when the cycle is complete, transformation is inevitable, but only if you stop resisting it. Only if you start tracing the lines your pain is drawing. This is why she burns the same lie over and over, why the discomfort circles until you name it, why the ache in your chest feels geometric, why the grief lives behind your shoulder blades like a symbol pressed into your tissue. The pain is not your enemy. It is a glyph, a sigil, a compass made of fire. And when you stop trying to erase it, when you follow it, you begin to decode the shape of your own evolution. You see the symmetry, the intelligence, the grace that disguised itself as grief. You understand that your trauma didn't ruin your life. It sculpted it. And when you understand the pattern, you are no longer inside it. You are beyond it, watching it, rewriting it. You become the sacred architect, not a victim of cycles, but a witness to their purpose. This is the final secret of suffering. It was never here to hold you down. It was here to align you with the divine blueprint buried beneath your story. And Kundalini, she is the geometer. She traces every scar like a glyph, every wound like a rune, every tear like a line in the map that leads back to the fire. You were taught to raise it, to summon it, to control it through breath, posture, mantra, will. You were told that with enough discipline, enough effort, enough purity, the serpent would obey your command. But Kundalini does not obey. She is not a servant, she is the sovereign, and you do not raise her, she raises you. because you are not the activator. You are the instrument, and the fire only plays through instruments tuned by truth. She doesn't respond to force, she responds to frequency. Not your chanting, but your alignment. Not your ambition, but your surrender. You do not lift the serpent. She lifts you, out of lies, out of loops, out of the posture of pretending. You don't awaken Kundalini, she awakens you. She waits in silence for the moment the ego loosens its grip, for the breath to soften, for the trauma to surface without resistance, for the truth to hum louder than the story. And when that resonance is right, not perfect, not pure, but true, she begins to rise. Not like a spark, like a sequence, like a code being executed in divine timing. And it isn't you pressing the button, it's her turning the page. The mystics never claimed to raise her. They prepared for her. They built lives spacious enough for the current to move freely. They purified not for worthiness, but for clarity. They knew the fire is always burning. What changes is your ability to carry it without distortion. You think you're doing something when you feel the pulse, when the spine buzzes, when the vision cracks open and the body trembles. But you're not the source. You're the vessel. And vessels don't initiate, they receive. This is why the fire humbles you. Because once it moves through you, you stop claiming ownership of anything. You stop performing enlightenment. You stop trying to master energy. You realize mastery was always surrender. Not to a guru, not to a dogma, but to what is moving through you without asking for your permission. And she doesn't ask for your permission. She doesn't knock. She doesn't warn. She simply rises when the time is right, on her terms, through your spine, through your resistance, through your fear, through the parts of you that still think awakening should feel good. Because she's not here to entertain you. She's here to empty you of pretense, of control, of the belief that you are the one directing the divine. You're not the director. You're the unfolding, the unraveling, the being raised into what you were before the world made you small. You don't raise Kundalini. She raises you from the ashes of your false self into the architecture of your real one. Not by force, not by practice, but by presence. And once she begins, you can never again pretend it was your doing. Because what you feel now isn't power. It's being carried by it. There are things they wouldn't write down, not because they didn't know, but because they knew too well. There are truths too alive to be captured in scrolls, too volatile to be passed through casual breath. They whispered them in caves, in ceremonies, behind closed eyes and sealed lips, because once spoken, they had a weight, and once heard, you could never go back. This is the part they guarded with silence. Kundalini is not just energy. It is consciousness itself. Pure, primal, unspeakable consciousness. And to awaken her fully is to awaken something in you that was never meant to be governed by human hands. This is what they feared to speak, not because it was evil, but because it was total. Total dissolution of identity. Total destruction of false light. Total erasure of everything that was not forged in truth. And few are ready for that. Fewer still survive it whole. The serpent is not a metaphor. She is ancient intelligence, coded into your very structure, waiting in stillness until the signal is clear. And when she rises, not partially, not flirtatiously, but completely, she does not come to grant visions or blessings. She comes to claim what is already hers, your soul, your center, your life, and the ancients knew. There are thresholds you do not cross unless your house is in order, unless your motives are clean, unless you are prepared to lose everything that isn't you. Because Kundalini does not elevate your life, she replaces it, piece by piece, breath by breath. They didn't speak it aloud because the unprepared turn power into poison, Because when you awaken the fire without grounding, you invite collapse, delusion, fragmentation so deep it splinters the psyche across dimensions. Not because the fire is wrong, but because the vessel was unready. This is why the elders tested you before they taught you. Why initiates were silent for years before uttering a word. Why the rites weren't recorded, only remembered. Because when truth this raw is exposed without structure, it doesn't enlighten, it burns. And the modern world forgot this. It turned the serpent into branding, turned the sacred into spectacle. It passed around what was once protected. And in doing so, it unleashed power without protection. Language without lineage, experience without integration. But the fire does not forget. She still honors the codes, and when she meets a vessel out of alignment, she pauses, or she purges, or she pierces, just enough to show the illusion, just enough to whisper what they once feared to say aloud. This path does not awaken what you want, it awakens what is real. The ancients feared to speak it because they knew that once the serpent is truly seen, she cannot be unseen. That once you hear her voice, the world begins to dissolve into vibration. That once you let her in, your life no longer belongs to your preferences. It belongs to truth. And truth does not flinch. So neither can you. You thought this was about becoming light, ascending, transcending, floating beyond pain into peace, beyond shadow into radiance. That's what they told you, isn't it? That the goal was light. That you were here to glow, to shine, to beam with divine presence. But light was never the goal. It was the mirror. And what it reflects is everything. The light does not erase your shadow. It exposes it. It does not eliminate your fear. It magnifies the places where fear still owns you. It doesn't lift you out of discomfort. It illuminates what you've buried in the dark. And Kundalini? She uses light not as a destination, but as a diagnosis, because what you see in the light reveals what you've hidden in yourself. This is why the closer you move to truth, the more discomfort rises. The more clarity you find, the more distortion shows up to be cleared. The fire doesn't bring you into bliss, it brings you into brutal honesty. And the light is not a reward. It is a test, a tool, a sharp, reflective silence that asks, "Can you see what's really there, and still not look away?" Most don't make it past this point, because the glow feels good. The mystical visions, the high vibrations, the spiritual performance of being awakened. But the mirror? It doesn't care about your vocabulary, it doesn't respond to your affirmations, it only reflects, and reflection doesn't lie. That's what makes it sacred. The light shows you your kindness, yes, but also your cruelty, your compassion, and your control, your alignment, and your avoidance. It exposes not just what you are, but what you pretend to be. And it does so without judgment, without flattery, without flinching. You can't ascend into light without descending into what it reveals, because light isn't peace, it's clarity, and clarity is not always kind. It's the moment you realize your truth has been wrapped in performance, that your depth has been decorated in distraction, that you've been using spirituality to avoid your own aliveness. And Kundalini, she doesn't punish this, she pierces it. Because the fire loves you too much to let you keep hiding behind your glow. She wants your essence, not your image. And essence is forged not in light alone, but in what the light reveals and how you respond to it. Do you shrink? Do you blame? Do you retreat into narrative? Or do you breathe, witness, stay? Because this is the real work. Not holding light, holding what it shows you. You're not here to become luminous. You're here to become true, and truth is what happens when the light reveals everything. And you choose to stand there anyway, unclothed, unfiltered, unafraid. Not everyone comes back. That's the part no one wants to say out loud. That some who enter the fire don't exit the same way. Not because they failed, but because the self they were was never meant to survive the encounter. Kundalini doesn't promise recovery, she promises revelation, and revelation once seen cannot be unseen. Some stay in the silence, others vanish into visions, some spiral, some soar, but all who meet the full current come face to one unrelenting truth. The person you were cannot follow you forward. This is why some disappear, why they walk into the woods and never speak the same again, why they stop answering messages, why their gaze changes, why they shed relationships like old skin. It's not disconnection, it's discontinuity, a rupture between the before and after, because the before was a performance. And the after is still being written. Kundalini doesn't bring you clarity at first, she brings you rupture, and not everyone has the ground to hold it. You must understand, this current is not gentle. It doesn't adapt to your schedule. It doesn't cater to your comfort. When she rises fully, she takes the floorboards, the ceiling, the walls. She leaves you standing in raw sky, wondering who is breathing through your body. And some call that madness. Because they were never told what this really is. They thought it would be expansion, not erasure. They thought it would be elevation, not exposure. They thought they would remain intact, only brighter. But Kundalini doesn't enhance identity, she dissolves it. And dissolution is a kind of death, one that many are not taught to navigate, one that modern culture, obsessed with image and certainty, has no container for. There are no elders on the other side of Instagram, no guides in the algorithm, just fire, silence, and a soul on its knees, remembering what it means to be real. This is why the ancient paths had lineage, why the initiates had guardians, why the temples had thresholds that couldn't be crossed alone. Because real transformation is not individual, it requires holding, and when that holding is absent, the fire fragments what it was meant to refine. Some never return because they were never shown how. Not how to ground, not how to integrate, not how to let the serpent teach in silence. They chased the rise, and when it rose, they were unrooted, unprepared, overexposed. Their vessel became too open, too fast, and in that flood, the structure couldn't hold. But some don't return because they choose not to. They find something in that fire that cannot be explained, a depth so profound it makes the surface irrelevant. They become flame walkers, edge dwellers, not lost, but listening to something older than language. They don't return to society's definitions, because those definitions no longer recognize what they've become. Not broken, remade. And that's the mystery no one wants to name. Awakening is not a loop, it's a threshold. Once crossed, you do not go back. You do not return. You become. And becoming has no map. You thought it was linear, step by step, one layer at a time, a clean upward arc from ignorance to illumination. But Kundalini doesn't climb ladders. She moves in spirals, she loops, she circles back. She returns you to the same lesson, the same wound, the same gate, again and again. But each time, you're different. Each time, you're deeper. Awakening is not ascent, it's recursion. It's descent into the same center from 1,000 angles. And the serpent. She doesn't travel in straight lines. She coils, she pulses, she arcs like breath in a body that no longer needs to understand, only to listen. This is why the patterns return, why the grief resurfaces, why the old fear whispers again after months of silence. It's not regression, it's spiral intelligence. What hasn't been healed fully will echo quietly until it can echo no more, not to torment, but to complete itself. Completion requires repetition. The mind hates this. It wants arrival, closure, certainty. But the soul speaks in spirals. It says, again, deeper, softer. This time, touch it without judgment. This time, stay longer. This time, don't flinch. And every spiral peels a layer, Every return deepens the gaze. Every loop is a tuning fork against your spine, humming you back into alignment. The spiral is the curriculum. And Kundalini, she is the teacher who never rushes the lesson. She takes you back not to punish, but to refine. She shows you that awakening is not about speed, but spiral fluency. The ability to revisit your pain without collapse, to revisit your truth without pride, to revisit your wounds without worshipping them. Because even healing can become an identity. A loop, a false center dressed as progress. But the spiral has no center, only motion. This is why stillness isn't stagnation, it's spiral rest. Why conflict isn't failure, it's spiral fire. Why silence isn't emptiness, it's spiral space. You are not stuck, you are circling. And with every breath, the circle widens, deepens, unfolds into fractal awareness. The universe doesn't evolve in lines, it dances in spirals. Galaxies spiral, DNA spirals, vortices spin. So does trauma, so does time, so does transformation. You were never meant to level up. You were meant to return differently each time. And the serpent honors this. She doesn't push you to escape the spiral. She teaches you to dance within it. To know that arrival is not a location. It's a rhythm, a pulse, a movement that feels like stillness. A stillness that reveals the movement. You don't escape the spiral. You become it. And when you do, life stops feeling like repetition and starts feeling like revelation. Not because the circumstances change, but because you do. You stop resisting what returns. You start listening to what it asks, and what it asks always is this. Can you meet this again? With more presence than before? You were taught to fear power, or to idolize it, to contain it, to dress it in robes and rituals. But rarely were you told the truth, that real power, sacred power, is not safe. It was never meant to be. It doesn't coddle, it doesn't conform, it doesn't bend to comfort or convenience. And Kundalini? She is pure power, not metaphor, not mood, not mystical metaphor wrapped in silk. She is the raw voltage of what you truly are, unfiltered. And when she rises, safety ends. Not because you are in danger, but because danger was always the disguise of what was unfamiliar, ungoverned, uncontrollable. And the serpent is all three. She cannot be managed. She cannot be tamed. She doesn't arrive to make you feel better. She arrives to make you real. This is why the temples had thresholds, why the initiates were tested with fire and silence, why the mysteries were veiled in symbols, guarded by paradox. Because those who carry this current without preparation fracture. Not because the energy is cruel, but because it honors truth over tolerance, and it doesn't wait for permission. The divine doesn't ask to be made safe, it asks to be made sovereign. And sovereignty means risk, it means instability, it means dying to what made you palatable and predictable. It means burning the costume, burning the compromise, burning the image of yourself you spent a lifetime sculpting for others. This power was never meant to be domesticated. It was meant to disrupt, to disarm, to descend like wildfire and leave only what was forged in truth. And most people don't want that. They want a glow without the heat, insight without annihilation, ascension without excavation. But Kundalini doesn't negotiate. She rises through fracture, through surrender, through the part of you that no longer needs to be safe, because it remembers it is eternal. This is the paradox of sacred power. It terrifies the ego and liberates the soul. It threatens the system and rebirths the essence. And once it moves through you, truly, completely, you stop asking to be protected. You start asking to be used, not used in service of self-image, but in service of what's real, what's needed, what shakes the world awake. And the world needs your unsafety. It needs your raw, your wild, your unshaved, unfiltered, undiluted fire. It needs the version of you that isn't trying to behave, isn't trying to heal into someone acceptable. It needs the version of you that stopped trying to be good and started being true. Because the serpent isn't here to make you behave. She's here to make you whole. And wholeness, by its very nature, is dangerous. Not because it harms, but because it changes everything it touches. And when you are that kind of power, you no longer wonder if it's safe. You wonder if you're ready to carry what safety could never give you. The full expression of your being, burning, breathing, unbound. You've come full circle, not to an end, but to a return. Not to answers, but to awareness. The serpent is no longer a symbol. She breathes behind your eyes, she coils in your spine, she moves through your choices, and now you're not asking what she is. You're asking what she's asking of you. Because remembering is not the final act. It's the first responsibility. You've felt the fire, you've wept through the shedding, you've spiraled through the thresholds, lost count of how many selves you left behind. And now you stand here, still, bare, awake. And the question burns, not from outside, but from within. What will you do with this flame? Because it's no longer about experience, it's about embodiment. Not what you saw in visions, not what moved in meditation, but how you will walk through the world now, with this light inside your bones, with this voltage behind your silence, with this truth humming in your fingertips. This is not a performance. This is presence. This is where the work begins. Not in the next ritual, but in the next conversation. Not in the ceremony, but in the conflict. In how you speak to someone who doesn't understand you. In how you breathe through discomfort without bypass. In how you hold your ground, not with force, but with frequency. You don't need to tell them you've awakened. You show them. In your listening, in your boundaries, in your refusal to shrink, in the way your very being rearranges a room without saying a word. Because Kundalini is not something you talk about. She is something you become, and becoming isn't loud. It's inevitable. It's in how you say no without fear, how you say yes without need, how you hold space for someone else's storm without trying to fix it, how you stop waiting for permission to be what you already are. The fire doesn't make you better, it makes you real. And realness in this world is rebellion, because a person who remembers cannot be managed, cannot be marketed, cannot be manipulated into forgetting again. And that is dangerous. So the final question isn't, what happened to you? It's, what happens now that you remember? Will you keep seeking highs, or will you integrate? Will you chase more signs, or will you become one? Will you orbit the sacred, or will you embody it? The serpent has done her part. She rose, she burned, she hollowed and restructured. She showed you who you are under all that striving. And now? Now she watches. Not as test, but as witness. She waits to see if you will live what she lit inside you. If you will walk like fire shaped into form. If you will be the altar in motion, not preaching, just radiating. This is the last truth. The fire was never the point. You were.